The moment Prudence Sawyer's knees buckled beneath her weight in the middle of Gunnison's dusty Main Street, she knew she had finally reached the end of what little strength remained in her bones. The August sun of 1876 blazed mercilessly overhead as she collapsed onto the hard, packed earth, her vision swimming with dark spots that threatened to swallow her whole. She had been traveling for 3 weeks, her wagon breaking down just outside of town, forcing her to walk the final 5 miles with nothing but a small canvas sack containing her few remaining possessions. The flour mill where she had hoped to find work loomed ahead, but her body had given up before her determination could carry her through those final 100 yards. Strong hands caught her before her head could strike the ground. Prudence felt herself being lifted as easily as if she weighed nothing at all, cradled against a chest as solid as the mountain granite that surrounded this high-altitude valley town. Through her blurred vision, she caught glimpses of a weathered face framed by shoulder-length dark hair, a thick beard, and eyes the color of storm clouds that studied her with unexpected gentleness. "Easy now," a deep voice rumbled above her. "When did you last eat?" Prudence tried to answer, but her throat was too dry, her tongue thick and uncooperative. She managed only a weak shake of her head before darkness claimed her entirely. When consciousness returned, she found herself lying on a narrow cot in what appeared to be the back room of a general store. The scent of coffee and cured meat hung in the air, making her stomach clench with desperate hunger. A woman with graying hair and kind eyes was pressing a cool cloth to her forehead. "There you are," the woman said softly. "You gave us quite a scare, dear. I am Martha Jenkins. My husband owns this store. The mountain man who brought you in is still out front, worried sick about you." "Mountain man," Prudence croaked, accepting the cup of water that Martha held to her lips. "Augustus Zimmerman. Comes down from his cabin in the high country every few weeks for supplies. Been trapping and hunting up there for near about 6 years now. Keeps mostly to himself, but he has a good heart." Martha smiled knowingly. "He insisted on staying until you woke up." Prudence slowly sat up, her head still spinning but the worst of the dizziness having passed. She took in her surroundings properly now, noting the neatly organized shelves of goods, the small potbelly stove in the corner, and the door that led back to the main store. "I should thank him, and I should explain that I cannot pay for any of this kindness. I have almost nothing left." "Hush now," Martha scolded gently. "Augustus already paid for the doctor to come check on you. Doctor said you are malnourished and exhausted but otherwise healthy. You just need rest and proper food." She paused, studying Prudence with maternal concern. "Where were you headed, child? You do not look like you have any business being out here alone." The words stung, though Prudence knew they were not meant cruelly. She was 22 years old, had been married once to a man who died of fever 2 years ago in Kansas, and had been trying to make her own way ever since. "I heard the flour mill was hiring. I can keep books and I am good with numbers. I thought perhaps I could find work here." Martha's expression grew sympathetic. "The mill did hire someone just last week, but there might be other work in town. Gunnison is growing fast with all the mining activity in the area. Let us get some food in you first, then we can worry about the rest." Over the next hour, Prudence ate slowly and carefully, not wanting to make herself sick after going so long with so little. Martha brought her beef stew, fresh bread, and more water than she could drink. Each bite felt like a small miracle, and Prudence found tears pricking her eyes at the simple kindness of these strangers. When she finally felt steady enough to stand, Martha led her out into the main store. Augustus Zimmerman was standing near the front window, his massive frame blocking much of the afternoon light. He had to be at least 6 feet 3 inches tall, with shoulders so broad they strained against his worn flannel shirt. His arms, visible where his sleeves were rolled up, were corded with muscle built from years of hard mountain living. When he turned at the sound of their footsteps, Prudence found herself momentarily unable to speak. He was not handsome in any conventional sense. His face was too rugged, too weathered by wind and sun and cold. But there was something compelling about him, something in the directness of his gaze and the set of his strong jaw that made her heart beat a little faster. "Miss," he said simply, his voice that same deep rumble she remembered from the street. "Glad to see you on your feet." "I owe you my thanks," Prudence said, lifting her chin despite her embarrassment at having to be rescued. "You likely saved my life out there." Augustus shrugged his massive shoulders. "Any decent person would have done the same. Martha says the mill already hired someone. Yes, it seems my journey here was for nothing." Prudence tried to keep the bitterness from her voice but failed. "Where are you staying?" Augustus asked bluntly. Prudence hesitated. "I had hoped to arrange something once I secured employment. I have a small amount of money saved, but not enough for more than a few nights at a boarding house." Martha and Augustus exchanged a look that Prudence could not quite interpret. Finally, Martha spoke. "My sister runs a boarding house just down the street. She owes me a favor or two. I am sure we can work something out until you get settled." "I cannot accept charity," Prudence said firmly, even as her heart sank at the thought of returning to the brutal uncertainty of the past few months. "I will find work, and I will pay my own way." "Stubborn," Augustus observed, and Prudence could not tell if he approved or disapproved. "Practical," she corrected. "I learned the hard way that I can rely only on myself." Something flickered in Augustus's storm-gray eyes, something that might have been respect or recognition. "Martha, why do not you take her to see your sister? I will finish my business here and be on my way." As Martha bustled Prudence toward the door, gathering up a few items for her to take along, Prudence found herself glancing back at the mountain man. He had already turned away, his attention apparently on the list of supplies he needed to purchase. She told herself it did not matter, that she would likely never see him again, that she had more pressing concerns than the way her breath had caught when he had looked at her. But as she stepped out into the Colorado sunshine, she could not quite shake the memory of how safe she had felt in his arms. Martha's sister, Caroline, ran a neat boarding house at the edge of Gunnison's small downtown area. The building was 2 stories, painted white with green shutters, and surrounded by a modest garden that somehow survived despite the high-altitude growing season. Caroline was as warm as her sister, and after a brief conversation that Prudence could not quite hear, she agreed to let Prudence stay for a week on credit. "After that, we will see where you are," Caroline said kindly but firmly. "I cannot run a charity, you understand, but Martha tells me you are a hard worker and honest. That counts for something." The room Prudence was shown to was small but clean, with a single window overlooking the street and a narrow bed pushed against one wall. What caught Prudence's attention immediately, however, was what she would be sleeping on. The bed had no mattress, only a wooden frame with rope supports and a pile of flour sacks layered on top for cushioning. "I apologize for the accommodations," Caroline said, noticing Prudence's gaze. "My last lodger took the mattress with him when he left, claimed I owed him for unpaid work. The judge sided with him, fool that the man is. I have not had the money to replace it yet, but the flour sacks are clean, and if you layer them right, they are not too uncomfortable." Prudence managed a smile. "It is fine. I am grateful just to have a roof over my head," and she was grateful truly. But that night, as she lay on the lumpy, unyielding surface of the flour sacks, feeling every board beneath them, She could not help but remember the softness of the cot in Martha's back room. Her entire body ached from weeks of travel and deprivation, and the hard surface did nothing to ease her discomfort. She shifted and repositioned herself countless times, trying to find some arrangement that would allow her muscles to relax, but it was hopeless. This was her life now, she told herself sternly. She had survived worse. She would survive this too. The next morning, Prudence set out to find work. Gunnison was indeed growing, with new buildings going up and miners flooding in from the surrounding mountains. But work for a single woman was scarce and often unsavory. She visited every shop, every office, every establishment that looked remotely respectable. By the end of the first day, she had been turned away from all of them. "Try the laundry," one shopkeeper suggested. "They are always looking for help." The laundry was hot, brutal work, but Prudence took it without hesitation. She would be paid by the piece, which meant she needed to work fast and efficiently to earn enough for her room and board. The owner, a harried woman named Mrs. Chen, who had come to Colorado from San Francisco, showed her the basics and then left her to it. Prudence worked until her hands were red and raw, until her back screamed in protest, until the steam from the boiling water made her hair plaster to her head and her dress cling to her skin. She earned 75 cents that first day, which was barely enough to cover one night at the boarding house with a little left over for food. That night, she collapsed onto the flour sacks, too exhausted to care about their discomfort. But in the morning, every muscle in her body had stiffened, and the hard surface beneath her had left her feeling as though she had not slept at all. This became her routine. Wake before dawn, work at the laundry until her hands bled, return to the boarding house to eat whatever cheap food she could afford, then collapse onto the flour sacks for a few hours of fitful sleep. Days blurred into weeks. The other women at the laundry were kind enough, but Prudence kept to herself, too proud to share the full extent of her struggles. She saw Augustus once during those first weeks, from a distance. He was loading supplies onto a pack mule in front of the general store, his powerful body moving with easy efficiency. Prudence had been on the other side of the street, her arms full of laundry she was delivering to one of the hotels. She told herself she should call out a greeting, thank him again for his help. Instead, she ducked her head and hurried past, suddenly ashamed of how far she had fallen, of the redness of her chapped hands and the exhaustion that she knew must be written across her face. If he saw her, he gave no sign. 2 months passed this way. Prudence's body grew stronger from the constant work, but the lack of proper rest was wearing her down. The flour sacks seemed to grow harder and lumpier with each passing night. She would wake with her hips and shoulders aching, sometimes with her arms numb from having been pressed against the unforgiving surface for too long. Caroline apologized periodically, but could offer no solution. Money was tight all around. One evening in early October, as Prudence was walking back to the boarding house after another exhausting day, she heard the sound of hammering coming from the alley beside the building. Curious despite her weariness, she peered around the corner and stopped dead in her tracks. Augustus Zimmerman was there, his broad back to her, working on something with intense concentration. Wood shavings littered the ground around him, and beside him was what appeared to be the beginnings of a bed frame, far more substantial than the simple rope frame currently in her room. "What are you doing?" The question escaped Prudence before she could think better of it. Augustus straightened and turned, seeming unsurprised to see her. "Building a bed." "I can see that. Why here?" "Caroline mentioned you have been sleeping on flour sacks." He said it matter-of-factly, without pity, but Prudence felt her cheeks flush hot with embarrassment anyway. "That is none of your concern." "Maybe not." Augustus picked up a piece of wood, examining it critically before setting it aside. But I had the materials and I had the time. Seemed wasteful not to use them. Prudence's pride warred with her exhaustion and the desperate desire for a single night of comfortable sleep. I cannot pay you. Did I ask for payment? Then why would you do this for a stranger? Augustus was silent for a long moment, his gray eyes studying her with that same directness she remembered from their first meeting. You are not taking charity, he finally said. You are working yourself to the bone at that laundry. I saw your hands the other day when you passed on the street. Nobody should have to do that, and then sleep on flour sacks too. A person needs proper rest to heal. The casual mention that he had noticed her, that he had been concerned enough to look closely at her hands, made something warm and uncomfortable unfurl in Prudence's chest. Even so, I do not like being indebted. Then do not think of it as a debt. Augustus turned back to his work, clearly considering the conversation finished. Think of it as one person doing what they can for another. No strings, no obligations. Prudence watched him work for a few more minutes, mesmerized despite herself by the easy strength with which he handled the heavy lumber, the careful precision of his measurements and cuts. His hands, she noticed, were scarred and calloused but moved with unexpected delicacy when required. He built the way he seemed to do everything else, with quiet competence and no wasted motion. How long have you been working on this? She asked finally. Couple hours today. Started it last week when Caroline mentioned your situation. He fit 2 pieces together, checking the joint before nodding in satisfaction. Should be done in a few more days. Then I will make you a proper mattress. Got some good canvas and I know where to get fresh hay and wool for stuffing. A mattress too. Prudence's voice came out smaller than she intended. Augustus glanced at her again, and this time she saw something soften in his rugged features. No point in having a good frame with nothing but flour sacks on top of it. Prudence felt tears threaten and blinked them back furiously. She would not cry, not here, not in front of this strange, kind man who seemed determined to help her despite all her efforts to remain independent. Why are you doing this? She asked again, her voice barely above a whisper. Augustus set down his tools and straightened to his full, impressive height. I know what it is like, he said simply. To be alone, to have nothing, to work until you cannot think straight just to survive. Somebody helped me once, a long time ago. I have never forgotten it. What happened to them? The person who helped you died in a mining accident 5 years back. Never got the chance to properly repay him. Augustus picked up his hammer again. So I do what I can when I can. Nothing more complicated than that. Prudence nodded slowly, accepting this answer even as a dozen more questions rose in her mind. Who had Augustus been before he became a mountain man? What had driven him to isolation in the high country? And why, after 6 years of keeping to himself, had he decided to emerge now to help her? Thank you, she said finally, inadequately. Truly, I will not forget this kindness. No need to thank me until it is done, Augustus replied, but she caught the hint of a smile beneath his thick beard. Over the next several days, Prudence found excuses to check on the progress of the bed. Augustus worked on it in the evenings, after his other business in town was complete. Sometimes Caroline would bring him coffee and a plate of food, and the 3 of them would sit in companionable silence while he ate. Prudence learned that he had a cabin about 10 miles up into the mountains, that he hunted and trapped primarily for meat and furs to trade, and that he preferred the solitude of the high country to the noise and crowd of town. Why stay up there all alone? Caroline asked one evening, her curiosity getting the better of her. Augustus shrugged. Suits me. Do not have to answer to anyone, do not have to make small talk, do not have to pretend to be something I am not. That sounds lonely, Prudence observed quietly. Sometimes, Augustus admitted. But it is honest. I will take honest loneliness over the kind of lying companionship I found in towns like this. There was a story there, Prudence knew, something painful that had driven him away from society, but she did not press. She understood all too well the desire to keep certain parts of one's past locked away. True to his word, Augustus finished the bed frame within the week. It was a beautiful piece of work, solid and sturdy, with smooth joints and a headboard that he had carved with a simple but elegant pattern of pine trees. He and Caroline's husband carried it up to Prudence's room, where it replaced the flimsy rope frame that had been there before. "Now for the mattress," Augustus announced. "Give me 2 more days." Prudence could only nod, overwhelmed by the transformation of her sparse room. Even without a proper mattress, the bed frame made the space feel more like a home and less like a temporary stopping place. She returned to the laundry the next day with renewed energy, despite another night on the flour sacks. Hope, she discovered, was a powerful restorative. The other women noticed her improved mood and teased her about having a secret sweetheart. Prudence denied it, but she could not stop the blush that crept up her cheeks. "That is Augustus Zimmerman, is it not?" one of the older women, Betty, asked knowingly. "I saw him hauling lumber into the alley beside your boarding house. Big fellow, keeps to himself up in the mountains." "He is building me a bed," Prudence said, trying to sound casual. "As a kindness, nothing more." Betty laughed. "Honey, men like that do not build furniture for just anyone. He is sweet on you, mark my words." "You are imagining things," Prudence protested, but the seed of the idea had been planted. She found herself thinking about Augustus more than she should, remembering the gentle way he had caught her when she collapsed, the concern in his eyes when he spoke of her sleeping on flour sacks, the care with which he had crafted each piece of her new bed. She was still thinking about him 2 evenings later when he appeared at the boarding house door, Caroline beaming beside him. "It is ready," Caroline announced. "Come see." Prudence climbed the stairs with her heart pounding inexplicably hard in her chest. When she entered her room, she stopped in the doorway, momentarily unable to breathe. The bed that now stood against the wall was nothing short of miraculous. The thick canvas mattress, stuffed full and perfectly shaped, rested on the beautiful frame Augustus had built. He had even provided a pillow, and Caroline had contributed a colorful quilt that made the whole arrangement look warm and inviting. "Go on," Augustus urged from behind her. "Try it." Prudence approached slowly, almost afraid to touch it, as if the entire thing might disappear like a dream upon waking. She sat gingerly on the edge, then gasped as she sank into the most comfortable surface she had felt in months. The mattress supported her weight perfectly, neither too soft nor too firm, with just enough give to cushion her tired body. "Oh," she breathed, and then, to her absolute mortification, burst into tears. Now," Caroline soothed, but Prudence could not stop. Months of exhaustion, fear, loneliness, and stubborn pride came pouring out of her in great racking sobs. She buried her face in her hands, ashamed of breaking down but unable to hold back the flood any longer. She felt the bed dip beside her, and then Augustus's large hand, surprisingly gentle, resting on her shoulder. "Easy," he murmured, his deep voice calm and steady. "You are all right. You are safe." The words, or perhaps the tone in which he spoke them, helped Prudence regain control. She wiped at her eyes with her sleeve, taking several deep breaths. "I am sorry," she managed. "I do not know what came over me." "Nothing to apologize for," Augustus said firmly. "You have been carrying a heavy load for a long time. Sometimes it needs to come out." Prudence looked up at him through her damp lashes, struck again by the unexpected gentleness in this massive, imposing man. "I do not know how to thank you properly. This is more than I ever dreamed of having again." "Then just use it," Augustus replied. "Sleep well, get your strength back. That is thanks enough." He stood to leave, and Prudence felt a sudden, desperate need to keep him there, to not let this moment end. "Augustus," she called as he reached the door. He paused, looking back at her with those steady gray eyes. "Would you like to stay for supper? Caroline is making stew, and I am sure there is enough." Something flickered across his weathered face, surprise perhaps, or pleasure. "I would like that," he said finally. That supper was the first of many. Augustus began timing his trips to town to coincide with the evenings when Prudence would be back from the laundry. He never said as much, but she noticed the pattern nonetheless. They would sit in Caroline's warm kitchen, eating whatever simple meal had been prepared, and talk about everything and nothing. Augustus told her about life in the mountains, about tracking elk through deep snow and watching eagles soar above the peaks. Prudence shared memories of her childhood in Ohio, of her brief marriage to a good man taken too soon, of her determination to make her own way in the world no matter how hard the path became. With each conversation, Prudence felt herself drawn deeper into the quiet strength that Augustus embodied. He did not sweet-talk or flatter. He simply listened, truly listened, and responded with thoughtfulness and honesty. When she spoke of her struggles at the laundry, he did not offer empty reassurances or suggest she simply give up. Instead, he treated her efforts with the respect they deserved, acknowledging both her strength and the genuine difficulty of her situation. "You are tougher than most men I have known," he told her one evening. "Not many people would have kept going the way you have." "I did not have much choice," Prudence replied. "There is always a choice," Augustus countered. "You could have given up, could have accepted something less than what you deserve, could have let yourself become bitter and hard. You did not. That takes real courage." The compliment warmed her more than she wanted to admit. She had spent so long feeling like she was barely surviving, barely keeping her head above water. To have someone see her efforts and acknowledge them meant more than she could express. And true to Augustus's promise, the bed made all the difference. For the first time in months, Prudence slept deeply and woke feeling genuinely rested. Her body began to heal from the constant abuse of hard labor and harder sleeping conditions. The women at the laundry remarked on how much better she looked, how her eyes were clearer, and her skin had lost that gray tinge of exhaustion. October faded into November, and the first snows began to dust the high peaks surrounding Gunnison. Augustus's trips to town became less frequent as winter approached, and Prudence found herself eagerly anticipating each visit. She began to understand what Betty had suggested weeks ago. Augustus Zimmerman was indeed sweet on her, in his quiet, undemonstrative way. And she, despite all her resolutions to remain independent and unattached, was falling for him in return. It frightened her, this growing attachment. Her husband's death had taught her how much it hurt to lose someone you loved. The subsequent years of struggling alone had taught her the value of self-reliance. But Augustus seemed to understand both lessons. He never pushed, never demanded, never tried to make her dependent on him. Instead, he simply existed as a steady presence, offering help when needed but respecting her fierce need to stand on her own feet. One evening in mid-November, as they sat by Caroline's fire after supper, Augustus cleared his throat awkwardly. "Snow will be getting deep soon," he said. "I probably will not make it back to town until spring." Prudence's heart sank, though she tried not to show it. "Of course, you need to prepare for winter." "Come with me," he said abruptly. Prudence stared at him. "What?" Augustus leaned forward, his gray eyes intense. Come up to the cabin with me, just for a visit, a week or two before the really heavy snows hit. I want to show you what my life is like up there. And then, if it suits you, you could stay. Augustus, I cannot just leave. I have my work at the laundry, my room here. The laundry is destroying your hands, and you know it, he said bluntly. As for the room, Caroline will hold it for you if you ask, or I will pay for it if that is what concerns you. Prudence, I am not trying to trap you or take away your independence. I am asking you to consider a different kind of life, one where you do not have to work yourself into the ground just to survive. What exactly are you asking? Prudence's voice came out shakier than she intended. Augustus took a deep breath. I am asking if you would consider being my wife. Not right now, not until you are ready and sure. But I want you to see what I can offer, what our life together could be like. The cabin is solid and warm, there is always food, and the work is hard but shared. You would never have to sleep on flour sacks again, or ruin your hands in scalding water, or wonder where your next meal was coming from. You barely know me, Prudence whispered, but her heart was racing. I know enough, Augustus replied. I know you are strong and honest and brave. I know you work harder than anyone I have ever met. I know that when you smile, which is not often enough, it feels like sun breaking through clouds. And I know that I have not stopped thinking about you since the day I caught you falling in that street. Prudence felt tears prick her eyes again, but this time they were not tears of exhaustion or despair. I do not know what to say. Say you will at least come see the cabin. Give me a chance to show you what I am offering. If you hate it, if you want to come back to town, I will bring you back with no hard feelings and no expectations. But give us a chance, Prudence. Please. The raw honesty in his voice, the vulnerability that he allowed her to see beneath his stoic exterior, undid her. All right, she heard herself say. I will come for a visit. But Augustus, I need you to understand that I am not some damsel who needs rescuing. If I say yes to more than a visit, it will be because I choose it, not because I have no other options. I would not want it any other way, Augustus assured her, and the smile that broke across his bearded face was like nothing she had ever seen from him before. It transformed his rough features, revealing the good man beneath the weathered exterior. Caroline, who had been tactfully staying in the other room but had almost certainly been listening, appeared in the doorway with barely suppressed excitement. When do you leave? 3 days, Augustus said. That will give Prudence time to settle things at the laundry and pack what she needs. Those 3 days passed in a blur. Prudence gave notice at the laundry, much to Mrs. Chen's disappointment but not surprise. I knew you would not stay long, the older woman said. You were too good for that work, but you did it well while you were here, and I wish you happiness. Prudence packed her meager belongings, including the few items of clothing she owned, and the small treasures she had managed to keep through all her travels. Caroline insisted on lending her warmer clothes for the mountain weather, and Martha contributed dried goods and other supplies from the general store. That Augustus is a good man, Martha told her firmly. Rough around the edges, but solid all the way through. You could do much worse. I am only going for a visit, Prudence protested weakly. Martha's knowing smile said she did not believe that for a moment. On the morning of their departure, Prudence stood in her small room one last time, looking at the beautiful bed that had changed everything. It had been more than just a place to sleep. It had been proof that someone saw her struggles and cared enough to do something about them. It had been the first step towards something she had not even known she was looking for. Augustus was waiting outside with 2 horses and a pack mule loaded with supplies. He helped Prudence mount with patient guidance, showing her how to sit properly and hold the reins. She had ridden before, but not often, and never on mountain trails. Stay close behind me, he instructed. The trail is narrow in places, and there are spots where you need to be careful. But I promise, it is worth it when we get there." They left Gunnison as the sun was rising, painting the snow-capped peaks in shades of pink and gold. Prudence looked back once at the town that had been her home for the past few months, then turned her face forward. Whatever lay ahead, she was ready to meet it. The trail wound up into the mountains, following a creek that rushed and tumbled over smooth stones. Aspens lined the path, their golden leaves still clinging stubbornly to branches despite the late season. Higher up, they gave way to pine and spruce, dark green against the white of the higher slopes. The air grew thinner and colder, but Augustus had made sure Prudence was bundled in warm clothes, and the exercise of riding kept her blood flowing. They stopped for lunch beside a waterfall, where Augustus unpacked bread, cheese, and dried meat. Prudence ate while watching the water cascade down the rocks, marveling at the untamed beauty of this place. In town, she had been so focused on survival that she had forgotten to notice the world around her. Now, surrounded by mountains and forests and sky, she felt something long dormant stir within her chest. "It is beautiful," she said softly. Augustus followed her gaze. "It is home. Wait until you see the cabin." They reached it in late afternoon, as shadows were beginning to lengthen across the small clearing where Augustus had built his sanctuary. The cabin was larger than Prudence had expected, constructed of whole logs carefully notched and fitted together. Smoke curled from a stone chimney, and she realized with surprise that someone must be inside keeping the fire going. "My neighbor Thomas," Augustus explained, seeing her confusion. "He has a place about a mile north. We look after each other's property when one of us is away." A grizzled man who looked to be in his 60s emerged from the cabin, grinning broadly. "About time you got back, Augustus, and you brought company. That is a first." He extended a hand to Prudence as she dismounted somewhat stiffly. "Thomas Walker, pleased to make your acquaintance, miss." "Prudence Sawyer," she replied, liking him immediately. "Prudence is going to be staying for a bit," Augustus said, beginning to unload the mule. "Wanted to show her what mountain living is like." Thomas's eyebrows rose, but he was too polite to pry. "Well, the cabin is in good shape. Fire has been going steady, and I brought over some fresh elk meat yesterday. You are all set." After Thomas left with promises to stop by again soon, Augustus showed Prudence inside. The cabin was a single large room, with a massive stone fireplace at one end and a kitchen area at the other. A sturdy table with chairs occupied the center, and in the corner near the fireplace stood a bed that made Prudence catch her breath. It was even more beautiful than the one Augustus had built for her in town, with a thick feather mattress and soft furs piled on top for warmth. "You sleep there," Augustus said quickly, seeing where her gaze had fallen. "I will make up a bedroll by the fire. Augustus, this is your home." "I cannot take your bed. You are my guest," he said firmly. "And I have slept by the fire more times than I can count. I will be perfectly comfortable." Over the following days, Prudence discovered the rhythm of mountain life. Augustus was up before dawn, checking his trap lines and hunting for fresh meat. Prudence helped where she could, learning to cook over the open fire, to preserve meat and vegetables, to mend clothing and gear. The work was different from the laundry, more varied and somehow more satisfying. She could see the direct results of her efforts in the meals they shared, in the clean cabin, in the growing stockpile of supplies for winter. But more than the work, Prudence found herself captivated by the easy companionship that developed between them. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire while Augustus carved spoons and bowls from wood and Prudence mended or sewed. They talked about everything and nothing, comfortable in the silence when words were not needed. Augustus told her about growing up in Missouri, about losing his parents young and being raised by an uncle who taught him to hunt and trap. He spoke briefly, painfully, about a woman who had promised to marry him and then left him for a wealthier man back in St. Louis. "That was 8 years ago," he said. "Came out here to forget her, found I preferred this life anyway. No pretense, no lies, just the mountains and the work and the changing seasons." Prudence shared her own story more fully than she had before, speaking of her happy childhood, her marriage to Daniel, his death, and the long struggle that had followed. "I thought I would never trust anyone again," she admitted. "Never let anyone get close enough to hurt me. But you are different, Augustus. You see me as I am, not as what you want me to be." "Same for me," he replied quietly. "You do not try to change me or civilize me. You just accept that this is who I am." 2 weeks passed, then 3. The heavy snows Augustus had predicted began to fall, blanketing the high country in white silence. Prudence knew she should ask to be taken back to town, that she was supposed to be just visiting. But every time she thought about leaving, about returning to the laundry and her small room and the loneliness that had defined her life for so long, something in her chest tightened with dread. She was happy here. Truly, deeply happy in a way she had not been since Daniel died. The work was hard but satisfying, the cabin was warm and comfortable, and Augustus was everything she had not known she was looking for. Strong but gentle, protective but respectful of her independence, quiet but present in all the ways that mattered. One evening, as they sat by the fire after supper, Augustus set aside the bowl he was carving and looked at her directly. "Prudence, I need to know what you are thinking. The snow is getting deep. Soon it will be too dangerous to take you back to town even if you want to go. If you are going to leave, it needs to be now." Prudence's hand stilled on the shirt she was mending. This was the moment of decision, the point where she had to choose between the familiar struggle of independence and the uncertain promise of partnership. "What do you want?" she asked. "I want you to stay," Augustus said without hesitation. "Not just for the winter, but forever. I want to marry you, Prudence. I want to build a life with you here in this place I love. I want to wake up every morning knowing you are beside me and fall asleep every night with you in my arms. I want to protect you and provide for you, and I want you to be my equal partner in all things. But I will only do that if it is what you want too, if you are choosing me because I make you happy, not because you see no other option." Prudence felt her eyes fill with tears for what seemed like the 100th time since meeting this man. But these were good tears, tears of joy and relief and certainty. "I choose you," she said clearly. "I choose this life, this place, this future. Augustus, I did not come up here expecting to fall in love, but I have. Completely, irrevocably. I want to be your wife." Augustus's face transformed with joy. He crossed the space between them in 2 strides and pulled her to her feet, his large hands cupping her face with infinite gentleness. "I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret this decision," he promised. When he kissed her, it was with a tenderness that belied his massive strength, a reverence that made Prudence's heart ache with how much she had found in this unexpected place with this unexpected man. She wrapped her arms around his broad shoulders and kissed him back with equal fervor, pouring into that kiss all the loneliness and fear and desperate hope of the past few years. When they finally broke apart, Augustus rested his forehead against hers. "We will need to wait until spring for a proper wedding with a preacher," he said. "But we can consider ourselves promised now if that suits you." "It suits me perfectly," Prudence replied. That night, with the snow falling softly outside and the fire crackling in the hearth, Augustus moved his bedroll next to the bed, close enough to hold Prudence's hand through the night, but respecting the boundaries that would remain until they were properly married. Prudence lay in the soft comfort of the bed he had made, surrounded by furs and warmth, and marveled at how much her life had changed. Just months ago, she had been sleeping on flour sacks, wondering if she would survive another week. Now she was promised to a good man, secure in a home that felt more real than any place she had lived since childhood, and looking forward to a future bright with possibility. The winter that followed was the happiest time of Prudence's life. Snow piled high around the cabin, sometimes reaching the windows, but inside they were warm and safe and content. Augustus taught her to snowshoe, to recognize animal tracks, to fish through the ice on the frozen creek. She taught him to read better than he had before, working through the few precious books he owned, and showed him how to make his stores last even longer through careful planning and rationing. Thomas visited occasionally, making the trek on snowshoes to check on them and share news or supplies. He was delighted by their engagement and promised to stand up with them at the wedding come spring. Through him, they learned that Gunnison had survived several heavy blizzards but was otherwise thriving, that Caroline sent her best wishes and wanted Prudence to know her room and her job were always available if needed, though she suspected they would not be. "Smart woman, that Caroline," Thomas remarked with a knowing grin. "She knew what she was about when she let Augustus build you that bed." As the weeks passed, Augustus and Prudence fell into an easy domesticity that felt as natural as breathing. They worked side by side on the daily tasks that kept them alive and comfortable, divided responsibilities based on strength and skill, rather than arbitrary notions of men's work and women's work. Prudence learned to skin rabbits and stretch furs, while Augustus discovered he did not mind the tedium of mending if it meant sitting close to her by the fire. They talked about the future, about their dreams and plans. Augustus wanted to expand the cabin before next winter, adding a second room and perhaps a small barn for animals. Prudence wanted to start a garden in the spring, to grow vegetables and herbs that would make their meals more varied and their medicine stores more complete. They discussed children, both agreeing they would welcome them if they came but feeling no desperate rush. "I want to have time with just you first," Augustus said. "Years to get to know every part of you to build something strong before we add anyone else to it." Prudence agreed wholeheartedly. She was 23 now, Augustus 28. They had time. The physical intimacy between them grew slowly, constrained by Augustus's firm insistence that they wait until after the wedding but expressed in 1,000 small touches. The way he would brush her hair back from her face, the way she would rest her hand on his shoulder as she passed, the long embraces by the fire when words failed and only closeness could express what they felt. Sometimes the restraint was almost unbearable, the desire between them electric and urgent. But those moments only made Prudence more certain of her choice. Augustus could have pressed his advantage, could have argued that they were isolated and promised, and what difference did a few months make? Instead, he held to his principles and honored his word, showing her yet again the quality of his character. Winter began to loosen its grip in March. The snows grew less frequent, the days noticeably longer. Augustus ventured further on his hunting trips, ranging down the mountain to check on the trails and assess when they could safely travel to town. In early April, he declared the route passable. "We will go down next week," he announced. "Get supplies, see the preacher, and marry you proper before the whole town if you are willing." "I am willing," Prudence assured him with a smile that made his gray eyes warm with affection. The journey to Gunnison felt both familiar and strange. Prudence had changed so much in the month since she had last traveled this trail, had grown into a confidence and contentment she had never known before. When they rode into town, people stared at the transformation. Gone was the gaunt, desperate woman who had collapsed in the street. In her place rode a healthy, happy woman with clear eyes and a ready smile, sitting her horse with easy competence. Caroline met them with squeals of delight and fierce hugs. "Look at you," she exclaimed, holding Prudence at arm's length. "You are absolutely radiant. Mountain life agrees with you." "Augustus agrees with me," Prudence corrected with a laugh. Martha insisted on hosting them at her home, refusing to let them stay at the boarding house or the small hotel. "Family stays with family," she declared, having apparently decided that anyone Augustus cared about was family by extension. Her husband nodded agreement, clearly having grown fond of the quiet mountain man over the years of supplying him. The wedding was arranged for 3 days later, giving them time to purchase a few supplies and Prudence to have a proper wedding dress made by the town seamstress. The woman worked quickly, creating a simple but beautiful gown of soft blue calico that brought out the color of Prudence's eyes. Augustus, for his part, submitted to having his hair and beard trimmed, though he drew the line at cutting either short. The result was striking. He looked civilized enough for polite society, but retained the rugged appeal that made Prudence's heart race. The ceremony took place in the small church on a bright April morning with half the town in attendance. Gunnison loved a wedding, and the story of the mountain man and the woman he had rescued had spread quickly. People who did not even know them attended just to witness the occasion. Prudence stood at the altar in her new dress, holding Augustus's scarred, strong hands, and promised to love, honor, and cherish him for all her days. Augustus made the same promises in his deep, steady voice that never wavered. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Augustus kissed her with such tender joy that several of the watching women sighed audibly. The celebration that followed was lively and loud, with food and drink and music provided by seemingly everyone in town. Prudence danced until her feet ached, laughing as Augustus swept her around in his surprisingly graceful arms. He was not an elegant dancer, but he was confident and attentive, his eyes never leaving her face. "Happy?" he asked during a brief pause in the music. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," Prudence replied honestly. As the sun began to set, they slipped away from the party, heading back to Martha's house where they would spend their wedding night. Martha had tactfully arranged to stay with her sister, leaving them the entire house to themselves. Augustus carried Prudence over the threshold with the same easy strength he had shown when catching her in the street all those months ago. "Welcome home, Mrs. Zimmerman," he said, setting her gently on her feet. "This is not home," Prudence corrected with a smile. "Home is a cabin in the mountains, but this will do for tonight." That night, in the soft darkness of Martha's guest room, Augustus and Prudence finally consummated their marriage. He was patient and gentle, careful of his considerable strength, attuned to her every response. Prudence had been married before, but this felt entirely different. With Daniel, she had been young and somewhat frightened, unsure of what to expect. With Augustus, she was a woman fully grown, choosing with open eyes and an open heart. The pleasure they found together was profound and mutual, a joining not just of bodies but of souls. Afterward, wrapped in Augustus's powerful arms with her head resting on his chest, Prudence reflected on the long, strange journey that had brought her to this moment. If someone had told her when she was collapsing in Gunnison's dusty street that she would end up here, married to a mountain man and deliriously happy, she never would have believed them. "What are you thinking?" Augustus asked, his deep voice rumbling beneath her ear. "I am thinking about flour sacks," Prudence said with a laugh. and how you built me a bed softer than any dream. I am thinking that sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead to the best ones. And I am thinking how grateful I am that you were in town that day, that you cared enough to help a stranger." Augustus tightened his arms around her. "Not a stranger. Not from the moment I caught you. I looked into your eyes and something in me just knew. This is the woman I have been waiting for. This is the one who will make sense of everything that came before." "Did I make sense of it all? More than that. You made it worthwhile. Every hard year, every lonely night, every moment I thought I would be alone forever. It was all leading to you, Prudence. To this." They stayed in Gunnison for a week, visiting with the friends Prudence had made and purchasing supplies for the year ahead. Then they loaded up their horses and mule and headed back into the mountains, back to the cabin that was now truly their home. The summer passed in a blur of hard work and deep contentment. Augustus expanded the cabin as planned, adding a second room that could serve as a bedroom once they needed the main room for something else. Prudence planted her garden, coaxing vegetables and herbs from the mountain soil with patience and determination. Thomas became a regular visitor, as did another neighbor they had not met before, a widow named Sarah who lived with her teenage son about 3 miles west. "Good to have another woman up here," Sarah said bluntly on her first visit. "These men forget how to have proper conversations when left to their own devices too long." Prudence liked her immediately, and the two women became friends despite the distance between their homes. Sarah taught Prudence more about mountain plants and which ones were safe to eat or use for medicine. Prudence shared her knowledge of preserving and planning, helping Sarah stretch her supplies further. As summer faded into fall, Prudence began to suspect she might be pregnant. She said nothing to Augustus at first, wanting to be certain before raising his hopes. But when 2 months had passed with no sign of her courses returning, she knew. She told him one evening in late September as they sat watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of orange and pink. "Augustus, I am with child." He went very still beside her, then slowly turned to face her. "You are sure?" "As sure as I can be without a doctor. But yes, I am fairly certain." The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise after a long night. He let out a whoop of joy that echoed across the valley and swept her up in his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests. "We are having a baby," he kept repeating as if he could not quite believe it. "Prudence, we are going to be parents." That winter was harder than the previous one, though not because of privation or cold. Prudence suffered through weeks of morning sickness that left her weak and miserable. Augustus hovered anxiously, trying to help but feeling helpless in the face of her discomfort. Sarah visited when weather permitted, bringing herbal teas and practical advice that helped more than anything else. "It will pass," she promised, "and then you will feel better than ever. Second part of pregnancy is the best part in my experience." She was right. By midwinter, Prudence's sickness had passed, replaced by a blooming energy and health. Her belly swelled with their growing child, and Augustus would spend hours with his large hand resting gently against it, marveling at every flutter and kick. "Strong," he would murmur, "already so strong." They spent the long winter evenings preparing for the baby's arrival. Augustus carved a beautiful cradle from pine, lined it with soft furs, and positioned it near the fireplace where it would stay warm. Prudence sewed tiny gowns and blankets, marveling at how something so small would soon be a person, their child, a combination of both of them. "You hope for a boy or a girl?" she asked Augustus one night. "I hope for healthy," he replied firmly. "And I hope they have your eyes and your spirit." "And I hope they have your strength and your good heart," Prudence countered. In early March, with snow still deep on the ground but the promise of spring in the air, Prudence went into labor. Augustus had prepared for this moment with characteristic thoroughness, having convinced Sarah to stay with them for the last 2 weeks so she would be there when the time came. Still, when Prudence's water broke in the middle of the night, he went pale beneath his tan. "It will be fine," Sarah said briskly, taking charge. "Augustus, get the water heating and the extra blankets ready. Prudence, let us get you comfortable." The labor was long and hard, lasting through the night and into the next day. Augustus stayed close, holding Prudence's hand, wiping her brow, murmuring encouragement even when she cursed him for putting her in this position. He took it all without complaint, his gray eyes full of worry and love and helpless determination to somehow make this easier for her. Finally, as the sun was setting on that second day, their son entered the world with a lusty cry that echoed through the cabin. Augustus wept openly as Sarah placed the squirming, red-faced baby in his arms, this tiny life they had created together. "He is perfect," he whispered. "Prudence, look at him. He is absolutely perfect." Prudence, exhausted but exhilarated, reached up to touch her son's tiny hand. He gripped her finger with surprising strength, and she felt her heart expand in a way she had not known was possible. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names for months but never quite settled on one. Now, looking at their son's face, Augustus said quietly, "Daniel, after your first husband. He was a good man, and I want to honor his memory as part of our family's story." Tears flooded Prudence's eyes at this unexpected generosity. "Daniel Augustus Zimmerman," she said. "It is perfect." Little Daniel proved to be a healthy, vigorous baby with his father's strong build and his mother's dark hair. Augustus was besotted, spending hours just watching the baby sleep or holding him close to his chest. Prudence had worried that he might feel awkward or uncertain around such a tiny creature, but those fears were unfounded. Augustus handled their son with the same careful competence he brought to everything else, learning quickly how to change and soothe and comfort. "You are a natural," Prudence told him one afternoon, watching him rock Daniel to sleep with such tenderness it made her chest ache. "I just never want him to doubt that he is loved," Augustus replied, "or that he is safe. Everything I did not have growing up I want to give to him." Spring came fully, and with it, a new chapter of their lives. Daniel grew rapidly, meeting each milestone with the robust health they had hoped for. Prudence regained her strength and returned to the work of maintaining their home and garden. Augustus trapped and hunted, always making sure to be back before dark so he could spend the evenings with his family. Thomas and Sarah both doted on Daniel, and other families in the surrounding valleys began to emerge now that the Zimmermans had proven that mountain life could sustain not just individuals but whole families. A small community grew up around them, isolated homesteads connected by mountain trails and mutual support. When Daniel was 6 months old, Prudence woke one morning and looked around at her life with wonder. The cabin was cozy and full of love. Her son slept peacefully in his cradle. Her husband lay beside her, one protective arm draped across her waist even in sleep. Outside, their garden was beginning to show the first green shoots of the season. The mountains stood eternal and beautiful against the morning sky. She thought back to that terrible day when she had collapsed in Gunnison Street, broken and desperate and alone. She thought about the flour sacks she had slept on for months, each night a struggle just to rest. And then she thought about Augustus building her a bed, that first tangible sign that someone saw her suffering and chose to ease it. That bed had been more than furniture. It had been hope made manifest, kindness given form. It had been the beginning of everything that came after, the first step on a journey that had led her here, to this life she would not trade for anything in the world. "Thank you," she whispered to the sleeping man beside her. for seeing me when I was invisible, for caring when no one else did, for building me not just a bed but a home, a family, a future. Augustus stirred, his eyes opening to meet hers. "Good morning, Mrs. Zimmerman," he murmured, pulling her closer. "Sleep well." "Better than any dream," Prudence replied, and kissed him as the morning sun spilled through their window, painting everything gold. The years that followed were not without challenges. There were hard winters when supplies ran low, hot summers when the garden struggled despite their best efforts, illnesses that swept through their small mountain community and took lives too soon. But through it all, Prudence and Augustus faced each trial as they had faced all the others together, with unwavering faith in each other and in the life they had built. Daniel grew into a strong, curious boy who loved the mountains as much as his father did. When he was 3, he was joined by a sister, Emma, who proved to be as determined and fierce as her mother. 2 years later came another boy, James, who was quiet and thoughtful from the start. The cabin expanded again to accommodate their growing family, and Augustus built beds for each child with the same care and craftsmanship he had brought to Prudence's first bed all those years ago. Thomas passed away peacefully in his sleep when Daniel was 10, and they buried him on his land with a beautiful wooden marker Augustus carved. Sarah moved closer to her son, who had started his own family in a valley 2 miles away. New families arrived, drawn by stories of the thriving mountain community. A small school was established, meeting in various cabins on a rotating basis. Prudence taught reading and arithmetic, sharing her knowledge with the children who might otherwise have grown up illiterate. Through it all, the bond between Prudence and Augustus only grew stronger. They had started from such different places, 2 broken people carrying wounds they thought would never heal. But they had found in each other not just comfort but true partnership, not just affection but deep, abiding love that weathered every storm and celebrated every joy. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Augustus led Prudence to a spot high above their cabin, a place where you could see for miles in every direction. The mountains rolled away in waves of green and gray and white, and the sky stretched overhead in impossible blue. "I wanted to bring you here," he said, "so you could see what I see. All of this, everything we have built together, started because I happened to be in town the day you needed help. I think about that sometimes, about how easily we could have missed each other. If I had come to town a day earlier or later, if you had collapsed a street over, if any one of 1,000 small things had been different." "But they were not different," Prudence said, taking his hand. "We found each other exactly when we were supposed to. You gave me a bed softer than any dream, Augustus, and then you gave me a life beyond anything I dared imagine. 20 years, 3 beautiful children, a home I love, work that matters, and you, always you." Augustus pulled her close, and they stood together watching the sun paint the mountains in gold and shadow. 2 people who had found in each other everything they had been searching for, without even knowing they were looking. That night, lying in the bed Augustus had built for them so many years ago, upgraded and refined over time but still fundamentally the same bed where they had spent their wedding night, Prudence thought about the long journey from flour sacks to here. About all the pain and struggle that had seemed meaningless at the time but had been leading her, step by difficult step, to exactly where she belonged. She thought about the young woman she had been, so desperate and afraid, working herself to the bone just to survive. She wished she could go back and tell that woman that it would all be worth it, that the suffering had an end, that love and home and family were waiting just around the corner if she could hold on a little longer. But even as she wished it, Prudence knew that young woman would not have believed her. Some things can only be understood through living them, through walking the hard road and emerging on the other side transformed. "I love you," Augustus murmured in the darkness, his voice thick with sleep but clear in its meaning. "I love you too," Prudence replied, and meant it with every fiber of her being. The years continued to pass, each one adding new chapters to their story. Daniel grew up to be a skilled woodworker like his father, eventually taking over much of Augustus's craftsmanship business. Emma became a teacher, taking on more responsibilities in the growing mountain school. James discovered a gift for healing and traveled to Denver to study medicine, eventually returning to serve their community as its first proper doctor. Prudence and Augustus grew old together, their hair turning gray, their movements slowing but their love undiminished. They watched their children marry and have children of their own, filling the mountains with Zimmermans who all knew the story of how their family began, with a collapsing woman and a mountain man and a bed built from kindness. On their 40th anniversary, surrounded by children and grandchildren in a cabin that had grown over the decades into a proper house, Augustus rose to make a toast. "40 years ago," he said, his voice still strong despite his age, "I caught a falling woman and thought I was just doing what any decent person would do. I had no idea I was catching my entire future. Prudence Zimmerman, you have made me happier than I ever dreamed possible. You have given me a family, a purpose, a reason to be grateful for every single day. I would build you 1,000 beds if it meant I got to spend one more night lying beside you." Prudence, her eyes damp with happy tears, raised her glass in return. "And I would sleep on 1,000 flour sacks if I knew you were at the end of that journey. You saved my life, Augustus, in every way a person can be saved. And then you made that life worth living." Their family cheered and drank, and the celebration continued long into the night. But eventually, when everyone had gone to bed or headed home, Prudence and Augustus found themselves alone, sitting before the fire as they had done countless times before. "No regrets?" Augustus asked, as he had asked so many times over the years. "Not a single one," Prudence replied, as she always did. "You—" "Only that I did not find you sooner," he said, pulling her close. "But I have you now, and that is all that matters." They sat together in comfortable silence, two people who had traveled so far from where they started, who had built something beautiful and lasting from the simplest materials: kindness, honesty, and love. Outside, the mountains stood eternal, keeping watch over the family that had made its home among them. Inside, the fire crackled and burned, warming a house full of memories and love. And in the master bedroom, the bed Augustus had built 40 years ago still stood, still solid, still soft, still waiting to cradle them through one more night of dreams. Prudence thought, not for the first time and certainly not for the last, that sometimes salvation came in unexpected forms. Sometimes it looked like a mountain man with strong arms and a gentle heart. Sometimes it came piece by piece, board by board, crafted with care and offered without expectation of return. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, that salvation did not just rescue you from your circumstances. It carried you to something better than you ever imagined, to a life so full and rich that the struggles that preceded it almost seemed worthwhile, because they had led you exactly where you needed to be. Augustus Zimmerman had built Prudence Sawyer a bed softer than any dream. But more than that, he had built her a life, a family, and a love that would last long after they were both gone, living on in the children and grandchildren who would tell their story for generations to come. As they climbed into that beloved bed one more time, their movements slow but their affection undiminished, Prudence smiled into the darkness. She had slept on flour sacks for months, Each night an endurance test that left her aching and exhausted. Now she slept on clouds, cradled in comfort and wrapped in love with the man who had given her everything, resting beside her. "Sweet dreams, Mrs. Zimmerman," Augustus whispered. "Sweet dreams, Mr. Zimmerman," Prudence replied, and they were. Oh, they were.